Okay, today we're going to talk about Indian exceptionalism. I originally wasn't going to make this video. I was going to start with American exceptionalism first and maybe get to Indian exceptionalism next, but someone actually called me a jealous Indian and I felt compelled to prove them wrong. So here we are. I'm essentially going to dismantle the Indian hubris surrounding their growth story with the GDP numbers in my next 4 points, but do note that I am not essentially contesting that the growth isn't real. It is actually real, but I just want to prove that their path to becoming a developed economy by 2047 is not as smooth, and there are a lot more or bigger fishes fry to essentially get there. So for first off, we have the macro illusion, right? We see 7 to 8% growth every year, and about India and China about contribute about 40% to global growth together, which actually makes it seem like India is a really promising destination, just like China is. But in my other video, I actually outlined China is a ticking time bomb. In the same way, I want to prove that it is here. So the main first problem is their actual economy. So for starters, if you look at the data, their services sector, which is basically exporting software, businesses, services, and consulting, accounts for about 53 to 55% of their GDP, which is fine generally. But the problem is they are more of a body shop that actually does things for other established Western companies than actually make products themselves. So this simple model is essentially going to be contested and disrupted by AI. So before you attack me or produce counter arguments that AI can't do this or that, I am actually a software engineer myself and actually understand the technology and its implications. And I genuinely believe it's going to have a big disruption in the general business services sector. And this is going to affect their economy because it's over leveraged on services and IT. And then there's my second problem, which is their demographics, which seems impressive, but they can't actually properly educate them, right? So about 83% of Indian engineering grads do not have job offers, and about 50% of MBA grads do not have job offers. And according to some data, only about 42.6% of the workforce is actually employable according to industry standards. So this actually leads to a problem where there are degree mills which actually give you degrees, but they're not actually worth anything. And the youth are generally unemployable. And this is going to lead to a problem where the youth are educated, but they can't actually secure equivalent jobs. And when you have a large amount of educated youth who face economic constraints, and it will definitely lead to unrest. And then there's a third point from which actually comes from my second point, which is the demographics. So when people take the demographics of India as a whole, they see the demographic dividend, and the human capital is actually the most impressive and or promising part of it, but it is not actually one cohesive theme, right? So when people look at India's demographics, they basically look at the republic as a whole, which is actually an illusion. If you look at specific Indian states, which are distinct in culture and diversity, they are very different. So for example, Tamil Nadu, Maharashtra, Gujarat, all of these states contribute disproportionately higher than their northern counterparts to the economy. They are much more developed, have higher literacy and human development. And on the other hand, you have states like Madhya Pradesh, Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, Rajasthan. They have really high population density, and they have some of the lowest development in the entire country. So essentially, there is a huge disconnect here. Furthermore, in the states like Tamil Nadu, which is like second in GDP, is actually has a fertility rate of about 1 to 1.2, which is like way below replacement around China levels. On the other hand, on the states like Uttar Pradesh, in some areas around those Indo-Gangetic Plain, has a fertility rate about 4.0 in some areas, which is really concerning. And this is going to lead to a lot of mass migration, which doesn't generally end well when the population isn't homogeneous. And we're going to see a lot of cultural divide in India going forward. There's already backlash and sentiments against ostracization, and this is generally just going to get worse. And we have the demographics on one side, and next we have climate. So this isn't actually factored into a lot of economic analysis about India I see nowadays, which is climate change, right? So climate change is very concerning, actually the most concerning among all my points. So about 76% of the population is projected to be at very high risk to extreme heat and other climate change effects. And this is generally going to make the Indo-Gangetic Plains, which has the highest population density in India, extremely uninhabitable, and you're going to have millions and millions of people generally migrating outward. And again, if you don't have the infrastructure to support mass migration, it generally isn't going to end well. You see this in Canada, but the difference is Canada can just shut off their immigration valve, but in India it's a republic and people can migrate anywhere, and this is generally not going to end well either. And it's not just the mass migration part. Just because of the increasing heat and climate change problems, by 2030 about 35 million jobs are projected to be lost due to this factor, and I don't see a lot of political will to actually counter this problem, right? And finally, I believe this is another important point, which actually comes from my first and second points with demographics and employability. So low skill manufacturing is very important for human development. Most developed countries usually start with agriculture, then they go to low skill manufacturing, then high end, and then they move to services. India essentially skipped low skilled and high skilled and directly leapfrog to services, which is fine. But about 45% of the Indian population relies on agriculture to sustain themselves, and this essentially made it so that they are struggling to get reliable low-skill manufacturing, and they don't actually have the infrastructure to actually be competitive on the world stage. Because of China, its protectionism, and all of the problems surrounding it, a lot of supply chains are diversifying from China to other regions. But even with the best human capital to exploit this problem, India is actually suffering from it and losing a massive part of the pie to Vietnam, Indonesia, Bangladesh. And they're actually lagging behind in low-skill manufacturing. This is a historic problem the government has struggled to solve for a long time now, and it isn't improving either. It's consistently around 44 to 45% in agriculture. And yeah, so I pretty much summed it up. I hope I was compelling enough in my arguments and proving that I am unbiased.